Stay Away from Tauerpine Road, Part 2, written by Random Appalachian 468. I must admit, I thought it'd be difficult to make myself relive the terrible night that changed my life forever. But after posting the first segment, I realized how wrong I was. It isn't difficult. It's excruciating. Memories hurt. They sear my emotions and tear my soul. Yet I have to go on to gain some form of closure. The world has to know what happened. Mark and I walked for the better part of 10 minutes before a tall, bulky shape loomed out of the blackness. At first I recoiled, thinking it was the creature. But Mark shone his flashlight at it and revealed a rusty collection drum, the kind used by oral derricks in our rural area for decades. This one appeared to be derelict, and when Mark climbed in the rickety metal steps to tug open the top hatch, it confirmed my suspicions. "Come inside. It's drier." He swept his flashlight beam over the nearby trees, as if to scan for anyone following us. I stuck my feet into the tank and found another ladder hidden just beneath the rim of the hatch. Mark climbed down after me and swung the hatch shut, sliding a thick metal pipe in place as a sort of deadbolt. The soft click of a lighter hissed through the dark, and the room filled with a cheerful yellow light. Across from the ladder, a dented kerosene lamp sat atop a dusty old folding table, the tiny golden flame contained in its glass orb. Under my feet, the floor lay covered in sections of broken wood pallets, with the metal base of the oil drum still coated in a sheen of congealed grease beneath them. The air smelled of wood rot, crude oil, and mildew, with the dull staccato of rain drumming on the outside of our little steel fortress all the while. Crates and various cardboard boxes were stacked against the curved walls of the oil tank, and against one side there stood a ragged cot with a few wool blankets scattered over it. On the cot, I noticed a newer-looking gray rucksack, a green canvas shoulder bag, and a red nylon duffel bag. Mark flicked his flashlight off and set it on the table. Now that I could see him better, he looked even worse. His clothes torn in places, both boots caked in mud. A half a dozen smeary handprints dotted his jacket sleeves, and something told me they weren't his. He had a well-worn 12-gauge shotgun slung over one shoulder, another flashlight duct-taped to his wooden foregrip, and an old-fashioned baseball bat hung in a crude sling on his back, its wood grain coated in more of the strange stuff from his coat. He turned to me, and Mark's eyes took in my pitiful appearance. "You okay?" How am I supposed to answer that? In some ways, I felt numb, too rattled by what had just happened to think. But I knew if my father were here, he'd want me to be brave, and I couldn't let my nerves get the best of me now. "I'm fine, I think. Just cold." Mark draped his coat over my shoulders and slipped one hand under my chin, examining my face. "Well, looks like you lucked out. You got splattered pretty good, but doesn't look like the puppet got its claws into you." I frowned as he guided me to the cot and sat me down. "Puppet?" "Yep." Mark's expression darkened somewhat, and he rummaged through his rucksack to produce a small packet of wet wipes. "The one that look like people, we call them puppets, because the big one uses them like hunting dogs to track you down." "What the?" My stare must have unnerved him, because Mark sighed and carefully dabbed at my face with the wipe. It's a long story. I told you to stay away, Maddie. Why didn't you listen to me? Indignant, I crossed my arms over my soggy shirt. I tried. A bunch of poles fell and blocked the road. Then Kendra appeared out of nowhere, and that thing grabbed her. So you just ran in? I narrowed my eyes, annoyed at his critical tone and how much it reminded me of my father's numerous security lectures. I wanted to save my friend, except she was never there. Mark held up the wet wipe so I could see what he'd cleaned off my face in the lamplight. Even after all the strange events of the night thus far, I'd half expected to see dark red blood. Instead, I blinked in confusion at black, algae-like sludge mixed with what looked like bits of wood splinter. Is that? Yep. Mark nodded and continued to check me over, like some army medic from his old unit. This is what came out of her head. They're not flesh and bone like you and me. The puppets are made from rotten wood by the big one, so they bleed black, not red. That's one way of knowing if they're real or not. Her teeth, they were wooden, just like the rest of her. How is that possible? I don't understand. Horrified, I looked down at my palms, scraped, bleeding, and muddy, and remembered how Kendra's skin felt hard under my fist. She looks so real. Mark handed me a small brown towel so I could dry my semi-frozen limbs off. They all do. Was Kendra with you? The real Kendra? No. I patted myself down, grateful to feel some of the heat return to my fingers. I just looked up and she never said a word. All at once, the events clicked together in my mind like puzzle pieces, and I sat up straight. Kendra hadn't said a thing, only made a scream. One any frightened girl could make, and one easy to replicate without risk of being discovered. She hadn't run over to my car at my invitation like any normal person would. She hadn't called my name, because that thing wasn't Kendra. Mark caught my stunned, open-mouth gasp, and his eyes moved to the hatch overhead, as if to check for signs of someone listening in. She was a lure, meant to get you deeper in, before its trap was sprung. The big one models all of its puppets off real-life people, whatever it sees or catches. Somehow it knew what Kendra looked like, and made her to trick you. The pictures on my phone, it could see them from the trees. Another sinister thought ran through my mind as I watched Mark kneel in front of me to inspect my bruised shins. Kendra had looked so real. Mark looked so real now. Real, but surprisingly calm. So, what are you doing here? I tried to avoid looking at him, afraid of what I might see. My job. Mark nudged the shotgun over his shoulder with one elbow, still focused on checking me for wounds. Hunting the big one. I found another entrance near Bethsaida Ridge and dropped my gear off here before going out to scout for a good ambush point. I set up a little blind near the road, then spotted your flashlight. Thought you were a puppet at first, but the other one tackled you, which saved you from getting your brains battered out. Just goes to show, you never know if someone's real until they're close. I edged backward on my cot, my throat dry. How else can you tell? Hesitating, Mark frowned, as if remembered something he'd rather forget. You ask them questions they can't answer. Puppets imitate whatever knowledge they're fed. So if they use the wrong voice, or can't answer very personal questions. So then that's the only way they would know that they're not real. Usually, the puppets are smart enough to know though, and once they realize the jig is up, they'll go for your eyes first. Both of his dark irises rose to meet mine, and the air stuck in my lungs. Knowledge rested in those eyes, and he waited for me to react with tense patience. Mark knew that I knew, or rather, didn't know for sure if he was in fact a walking nightmare disguised as my friend. All I could do now was ask, and wait for his eyes to roll back into his head, and his teeth to turn into pegs. I can't turn my back on him without being sure. So, I balled one of my fists under the coat he'd put over my shoulder, ready to smash his face in the second Mark lunged for me. "What's my favorite color?" Thunder rolled outside. The wind howled and trees creaked. Neither of us moved a muscle, both staring at the other. Mark's eyes searched my face, and I clenched my fists together, ready to swing with all my might. "Teal." He spoke the words like they were honey on his lips, and let slide in a fond, whimsical smile. "Like the necklace your grandma got you for your 15th birthday. Now are you gonna break my nose, Maddie?" Thank God for those long conversations. My face boiled with embarrassed heat, and I unclenched my fists to make a sheepish rug at my black and blue shin. Mark tinged crimson and tossed the filthy wipe into a gap in the crude pallet floor. "I hated pulling a knife on you like that, but I didn't have a choice. Like you said, it's best to be sure." Relieved enough to be curious, I dared to shift to a more comfortable spot on the blanket and let my mind work. "So, what is this place? Why are those things out there?" He rose to his feet and pointed to the green canvas bag next to me on the cot. "Get dressed, and I'll explain as we go. Everything in there should be dry, though you might have to mix and match to get a good fit. After all, I'm not exactly built like you." As we both noticed. The last bit came with a characteristic toothy grin from Mark that made me flush, and he crossed to the other side of the cramped room to turn away from me. I left my wet bra and panties on, what with Mark being only 6 feet away at most, and with my scrambled brain still not sure about our friendship. His spare t-shirt fit somewhat snugly, and I pulled a hooded flannel jacket over to avoid hearing my mother's stern rebuke in my head about what kind of man I wanted to attract, the good or the temporary. Luckily, the extra set of fleece-lined camouflage pants in the bag were loose enough that they weren't painted on, though I doubted they were baggy enough to have passed inspection. Regardless of the ill fit, it felt great to be back in warm, dry clothes, though they smelled like Mark's rustic cologne, something that made me both nervous and shy all at once. "For Pete's sake, they're just clothes. Get out of your head. This isn't the place or the time for being flaky." While I hurried to dress, Mark stood with both hands on his pockets, face to the wall. "Last year, Randy took me out to the old falconry station during a stormy night and warned me about Tauerpine Road. Of course, I didn't believe him, and when I spotted it on my 5th week, I went in like a moron. Luckily for me, he knew I was curious and came to get me. I guess it's been around since the 80s, when the land was given to the park by the old coal mining company. No one knows where it came from or how it got here, but, well, here it is." "How come you guys didn't let everyone else know?" I slid on a fresh pair of wool socks and wiggled my toes in pleasure at how soft they were on my cold feet. "You know, put up signs, roadblocks." "It's not that simple." Mark didn't risk turning to check and see if I was ready yet, but picked at some paint on the wall with his fingernail instead. I'd forgotten what a gentleman he could be, and it both made me smile and wince at the same time. It's not a regular road, Maddie. Not one you can just find whenever you want to. It's, how did Randy put it? It's like a door between our reality and somewhere else. A waypoint, I think he called it. Somehow, certain powerful storms can activate it and open the road. Anyone or anything that goes in gets lost in the labyrinth and usually ends up as lunch for one of the critters in here. From what he told me, the big one gets a lot of the people. I shivered and remembered how the huge gray figure lurched through the trees with its whale call roars. What are they? Mark stayed quiet for a moment, and he scraped at the makeshift wooden floor with the toe of his boots. No one knows. Randy thinks they're aliens, but I don't buy it. There are all kinds of things left behind here. Cars, trucks, clothes, gear, all without any trace of their owners. I think the big one changed them, made them into puppets to use like bait to catch more people. But there's more things in here than just them. I've seen deer without skin on their skulls, bears with armor plates made of bone, and flowers that can shoot poisonous needles. All of them will rip you to shreds in 10 seconds flat. And if you don't make it out by morning, you'll end up just like them. That's what happened to the guy who built this dump. How do you know? I swallowed hard, finished lacing up one grimy tennis shoe. At that, and turned red as a tomato to see me fully clothed. Our eyes locked, and a shudder ran down my back. Not cold, but warm, tingly, and pleasant. He really does have nice eyes. Kind of like chocolate. Jeez, Madison, would you stop? Terrified of the war within myself, I dropped my gaze back to my shoes and made a show of tying the other one. Mark jerked his head towards a lone, empty chair near the rickety table. Randy found what was left of him propped up right there, with a gun in his hand and a bullet in his head. His upper half was still human, but from the waist down, well, let's just say he was probably in enough pain that he didn't feel the shot. I figured he wanted to go out on his own terms. Yuck. Determined to distract myself, I threw the chair a glance. Grateful Mark had set me down on the cot instead. So, I take it we can't just sit here and wait for the storm to pass. Mark's grin of approval made him look more like my goofy friend, and less like a weary old man in a young man's body. Spot on. This place usually opens up at night, and by sunup, it's gone again. You can't just follow the road back out. It doesn't work that way. We have to find the exit before the sun rises without getting caught and killed. That's the easy part. What's the hard part? I stood and craned my head back to try and comb the twigs out of my tangled auburn hair. Mark's face drained of color, as if deep in thought. Let me worry about that, all right? You just focus on keeping your eyes peeled for anything that isn't one of us out there. He avoided my eyes this time, and something about it made me feel sick to my stomach. Mark had done that before, at a parking lot, kept the whole truth from me to protect me from a nightmare I couldn't even begin to imagine. I resented being treated like some porcelain doll that couldn't handle reality. But at the same time, part of me was too afraid to ask for it. My entire world had turned upside down in less than an hour, and all I wanted was to go home. If that meant Mark never told me the full story of this awful place, maybe that wouldn't be such a bad idea. I'm definitely never staying out after dark again. Here, sorting various items between the gray rucksack and the green canvas bag, Mark handed me a headlamp with a bit of red plastic cellophane taped over the lenses and a small flashlight without it. The white light's in case we get attacked for shooting. The red light we use when we're trying to be stealthy. Emphasis on the word trying. Won't they see it? I eyed the headlamp with doubt. He thumbed another green plastic shotgun shell into the receiver of his 12 gauge. Not as easily. Red light's harder to see in the dark, and even these things aren't that good. My fingers caught in a stubborn clump of hair, and I bit back an outburst at my own clumsiness. Let me try. Mark set his gun down, and from the depths of his ruck, he produced a pink hairbrush. Stunned, I opened my mouth to protest, but he stepped behind me, threading his fingers into my hair, and started to untangle each ratty knot with unexpected patience. Something about his touch, so light and careful, made a lovely warmth flow through me from head to toe, and I forgot whatever I would have said to stop him. Stroke by practiced stroke, Mark passed the brush through my hair, its bristles massaging my scalp, and I breathed in a deep, slow sigh of contentment. Wow. I'm not pulling too hard, am I? He asked, as casual as if offering me sugar for my coffee. No. I whispered, glad I faced away from him so that Mark wouldn't see me blush in pleased confusion. You're doing a good job, actually. Where'd you learn that? Mark chuckled, smooth, silky affection lacing his voice. Claire. She loves it when I brush her hair. This is one of her favorite ones. She gets all silly and drowsy every time, and it's cute, even if she doesn't think so. He sounds so happy, like he's smiling with his words. Some of the heat faded from my core, and I closed my eyes at the sick feeling that twisted in its place. This was a privilege reserved for someone else, someone who, unlike me, had chosen to love this man when the opportunity arose, and thus won his adoration in return. Deep in my heart, I knew I shouldn't be there. I shouldn't have enjoyed Mark brushing my hair. And I shouldn't have been feeling so guilty over someone who I saw only as a friend. With the memory of my own decision in mind, I pressed my hands to my stomach to stem the churning sensation there, and secretly hated myself for how much I didn't want him to stop. Congratulations, by the way. I never got around to... It's fine, Maddie. I appreciate it anyway. His words didn't betray any hurt or pain, but held kindness that only made the guilt harder to bear. Mark tugged my hair into a fairly passable braid and smoothed his palm over it when he was finished in a way that made my pulse flutter. I turned to face him, and we stared at each other wordlessly, the rain drumming on the oil tank in the background, while the wind growled in impotent fury against our rusty sanctuary. Don't say it, don't say it, don't say it. Do you hate me? I blurted out the words, too late to stop myself. His eyes widened, and my brain almost exploded in humiliation and panic. What? Mark cocked his head to one side, a look of confusion and alarm in his brown eyes. No, Maddie. Why would I ever hate you? My lungs seemed to constrict, and I dragged my eyes away from his to choke down an anxious breath. Because I said no. Again, silence cloaked the air, and I waited for a response. A damaged grimace, a sad condemnation for bringing up the dreaded past. How could I be this selfish? How could I keep doing this, wounding him over and over again? What was wrong with me? A hand rested on my upper arm and made me jump. I looked up to find him close, staring down into my eyes with a smile that drove some of the ache from my chest. All the pain in the world was worth gaining you as a friend. I have Claire now, and we're happy together. That wouldn't have happened if you hadn't told me the truth. You mean more to me than you will ever know. I just wish that was enough. Deep inside, my heart writhed, and I nodded mainly to keep myself from tearing up. Mark was happy. He was kind, sweet, good. And here I was. What was I doing? Having second thoughts? No, that couldn't be. Not now. Not like this. Mark pulled his rucksack on and slung the red bag over his shoulder as well. He handed me the green canvas bag and held out a shiny black pistol. You shot guns with your dad before, right? I took the handgun and weighted its heft in my hand, the stenciled 9mm on the slide standing out in the lantern light. How long had it been since I'd last gone to the range with my dad? If my memory served right, it had been several months ago. Then again, several months ago, I had been simple friends with Mark. I didn't bear the awful weight of my secret guilt every time I saw him. It seemed like a lifetime ago. I can shoot. My throat scratched with the dry words, but I buckled on the black nylon holster and sheathed the gun and pocketed the 2 extra magazines Mark slid my way. Good. Mark tucked a long black knife with a green scabbard into my belt and tapped a finger on the baseball bat over his shoulder. Try to avoid it if you can. Once we let off a shot, everything for miles around will know we're here, and then it's game on. Best thing you can do is take a club to them, or stick them in the throat to stop the screaming. Worst case scenario, conserve your ammo, run like hell. You didn't run back there. I tried to make a coy smirk, but it ended up coming across as a shy, thin-lipped smile, as I remembered the blow from his Louisville slugger that had saved my life. Mark's chocolate brown irises bored into mine, and the cavalier grin crossed his face, despite the cold, the dark, and our horrible situation. No, I didn't. Now stick close. Let's find that exit and get back to the admin building. Leaving the solid walls of the hideout felt like pulling against gravity, but I wasn't about to insist on staying there without Mark. I followed him back to the dense, rainy forest. The hood of his flannel jacket pulled over my head. The beam of my red headlamp trembled over the murky ground. Strange cries echoed through the woods, some like the bizarre roar of animals, others as macabre, near-human wails, and the ground shook with the claps of booming thunder. In between lightning bolts, I could feel the faint footsteps of the big one in the mud beneath my battered sneakers. There seemed to be no end to the trees, as if the forest had swallowed the road, along with any clearings or fields the daylight might have revealed. Down! Mark stopped abruptly, and I almost ran face first into his rucksack. I did as he said, dropped to a crouch behind him in the tall grass and froze, moving only my eyes to peer into the darkness ahead of us. Try as I might, I couldn't see anything. The red lights too dim, the rain too heavy, and I didn't dare speak out of turn, in case I would draw attention to us. Up there, he pointed up into the pine trees around us. You see him? My blood turned to ice the instant I tilted my head back. Oh man, they dangled from every branch and swayed limp in the wind like dozens of hanged convicts on the end of the executioner's noose. There were men and women, old people and children, all suspended by thick gray vines that led from the back of their heads up into the treetops. Their hazy white eyes were open, but stared with a blank empty gaze that made them seem more like life-sized marionettes than humans, and their clothes hung in waterlogged rags around them. Are those? Mark stroked the safety on his 12-gauge with caution and leaned close enough to whisper into my ear. Puppets. All the ones the big one made to lure people in before us. I think he stores them here, to recharge or something. See the vines? They're like power cords, but made of plant stuff. Squinting, I could just make out the slightest movements of the gray viney cords, how they pulsated like oversized rotted placentias, and pumped God knows what into the backs of the puppet skulls. It made my stomach wiggle, but I couldn't gag for the tension lodged in my throat. Come on. Mark picked at my sleeve and crept forward with slow, wary steps. Just stay low, and they won't even notice we're here. What? I wanted to tell Mark that was the worst idea I'd ever heard of, but he was already 5 yards ahead of me, and the thought of losing him in the dark was infinitely more terrifying than that cursed forest. Besides, he knew this ground better than I did, and at this rate, if he said to gargle peanut butter while doing a handstand, I'd do it. With my cold fingers glued to the pistol he'd given me, I plodded after Mark into the horrid cathedral of bodies, while the wind screamed through the pines. Every leaf that crumbled under my shoe, every stick that snapped, seemed to echo like a cannon in my anxious ears. Puppets hang at various heights, some 3 stories up, and some so close that I had to duck to crawl under their dirt-encrusted feet. I fought the urge to whirl around to be sure their eyes weren't trained on me, and matched each step Mark took with meticulous parity. The smell of rot was overwhelming, and I never wanted to vomit more than right then. Yet part of me wondered what it would be like to be caught up in those greasy gray vines, to feel the ends burrow into the back of my head, crack open my skull, and plunge deep into the folds of my brain. Would I be alive the entire time? Would I feel every creeping growth, every rip and tear of the invading tendrils, until I became a prisoner in my own mind, with no control over my body? Or would I cease to be me the instant they stabbed into my cerebrum, thrown into black oblivion, never to see the light of day again? Crunch! One massive gray leg plummeted through the canopy, and I dove out of the way, bits of broken branches and wet conifer needles tumbling around me. Mark and I backed into the damp trunk of a nearby tree and stared up at the enormous form in mute horror. The big one strode up to the suspended puppets with indifference to what lay around its bare feet, almost as if it hadn't spotted us. It didn't have toes like a human, but weird gnarled twists like root ends that poked out of its foot in every direction. Each massive 4-fingered hand had no fingernails, but jagged, sprout-like points that grew from the fingertips and reminded me of twigs on leafless winter trees. I still couldn't see the face of the colossal menace, the darkness of the rainy night like a cloak in its features. Stopping in the midst of the stored puppets, the big one slid the odd bundle of vines from its shoulder. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. Please, let this be a bad dream. But the dozens of figures that swung from the ends of all the strands were no dream. They grinned, wriggled, and waved to each other like kids on an amusement park ride, their milk-white eyes glowing in the dark. One by one, the gray giant plucked the individual puppets from the bundle and strung them up in the trees, the slimy vines snaking around their necks, burrowing into the backs of their wooden skulls. The puppets' eyes dimmed, the smiles faded, and their dense limbs went limp. A mutated nursery filled with mindless, sleeping children. The big one held the last puppet in its gargantuan palm and poked at it with an almost confused manner. From the ground, I could see the familiar shock of brown hair, along with the puppet's half-mutilated wood head. Low, baleen coos rumbled from the big one, and for some reason, they reminded me of a sad murmur, as if the monstrous creation couldn't understand why such a cruel thing had been done to its creation. Mark's tap on my shoulder sent a river of panic through me before I realized it was him, and he pointed onward, into the thick undergrowth. "Let's go, while it's changing out of towns." Above, the big one let out a mournful bellow and cupped the ruined puppets to its chest with both massive hands. I ducked after Mark, and we scrambled into the maze of briars like rabbits fleeing the wolf. The thunder, loud enough to hopefully mask our escape. Fresh rain met my face the instant we stepped out of the road, and Mark clicked his red light back on, breathing a sigh of relief. Like taking a stroll in the park. He grinned back, and despite my riveting fear, another smile stretched across my face as well. "Maybe a park for the insane. Did you see the way it acted about the Kendra one? Almost like it was upset." Mark took on a hateful glare, one he directed at the moisture-clogged forest behind us. It's not used to losing one of its precious pets. That thing's probably killed more good men than we know. The sooner it runs out of freaks to chase us with, the better. I couldn't agree more. We spent the next 15 minutes jogging down the side of the road, our eyes peeled for signs of movement. The rain seemed to have a will of its own and doused us without mercy, while the wind worked to freeze whatever got wet. My teeth chattered, and Mark's shoulders hunched in a repeated shiver that told me he too neared a hypothermic state. This couldn't go on much longer, yet the horrid roadshow showed no sign of ending, stretched on and on into the dark, without bend or turn. On my left, something tall and square rose out of the curtains of the falling raindrops. My heart skipped a beat, and I pulled on the back of Mark's rucksack. "Look, you see that, right? Is that a building?" He swayed to a stop, a harsh round of shakes racking his body. But I caught the renewed gleam in Mark's eyes. "Oh, thank God. I was afraid we weren't gonna find it." "Wait." I wanted to smile with hope, but my face moved like old rubber in the frigid rain. "Is this our way out?" Mark opened his mouth to speak, but as he turned my way, his already pale cheeks turned sheet white. A hushed croak from behind me made my blood turn to ice. I spun on my heel, in time to see a dark form lunge from the shadow. Its peg-toothed mouth gaped wide, a loud shriek piercing the air from her fetid lungs. How long had the puppet been trailing us for? I don't know. But she closed the distance so fast that my hand didn't even have time to reach my pistol. Bang! Mark's shotgun roared with concussive force, and the puppet went flying into the waterlogged drainage ditch, her legs and arm kicking in the throes of death. Like ripples on the lake, the echo of gunshots rattled into the trees, followed by an unnerving calm. My ears rang, but not enough to disguise every other sound falling silent. Mark and I shared a dread-filled grimace, and the entire world held its breath, like we'd broken some sacred unspoken rule. Maybe the lightning covered it. On cue, the entire forest we'd left behind lit up with a chorus of blood-curdling screams, and even from far away, I could make out the crash of bodies falling through the branches to the soggy, wet forest floor, only to throw ourselves through the underbrush at a breakneck speed. I'd been wrong before. I realized the tidal wave of screeches sinking through me with cold despair. There weren't dozens of them suspended in the trees. There were hundreds. Run! Mark hauled me by the canvas strap of my shoulder bag, but he didn't have to insist. I ran headlong after him, up the bank, on the other side of the road, our shoes slipping on the wet grass. Demented screams came from every direction. The thrash of the puppets permeated the woods. Their feet rang on the gravel road on haphazard drum beats. They were everywhere, running out of the forest, crawling through ditches, dropping from branches, all to home in on our bobbing red lights with wide maniacal grins. My sides ached. The green canvas bag bounced off the small of my back with every step, and rain stung my eyes. Both lungs felt ready to pop, and my legs grew heavier by the second. The fatigue from standing in a hot kitchen all day came back with a vengeance, and I realized I hadn't eaten or drank anything since lunch. My energy reserves depleted. They're going to catch us. We can't run forever. Oh, Dad. Oh, Mom. I am so sorry. Lightning cracked through the sky, and I almost tumbled down the opposite side of the bank, chest-high grass rushing up to meet me. Mark caught the hood of my coat and yanked me to my feet, his shout almost drowned out by the furious booms of the storm overhead. Stick with me. Come on. The closer we got, the clearer the enormous outline became. From the look of the dark structure, nestled in the midst of the grassy marsh, it had once been a part of the coal mining apparatus of the early 1960s. A gargantuan, concrete and steel building with a high square tower that stretched out over a set of overgrown train tracks. A large sheet metal warehouse branched off from the base of the tower and ran down into a slag yard surrounded by brush and tangled fencing. In one section, the fence had been toppled over by time and rust, leaving a gap about the size of a pickup truck. My legs, almost numb, but I threw myself towards the gap, the shrieks of the puppets right behind me. Mark's shotgun barked once more, and I turned to see where he was. He lay in the trampled grass only a few yards back, having tripped on a hidden log. Mark reacted in time to roll over and bring his shotgun to bear on the closest puppet, taking its head off with the blast, but more bore down on him from every direction. In seconds he'd be swamped. I stopped, my muscles twitching in protest, and the world slowed to a crawl. Mark was my friend. He'd saved my life. He'd asked me to dinner once, told me I was beautiful once, and forgave me when I couldn't do the same. Yet, in that moment, an awful thought crossed my mind. What if I didn't go back for him? Would the dread go away? Would the confusing, sickening, anxiety-inducing stream of jumbled thoughts in my head fade if he wasn't there to stir them up? If Mark wasn't there to smile in the warm way he did, or say my name with a gentle voice that gave me butterflies in my stomach, could I find a way to go back to normal at least? I wouldn't have to endure hearing about Claire, to see the ring on Mark's finger, or get social media notifications of the two of them on their honeymoon. I wouldn't have to face an uncertain future alone, with the knowledge that it all could have been different. I could have avoided all of it right this second. All I had to do was leave. Mark shot another oncoming puppet, but the one behind it closed the distance before he could rack another slug into the gun's chamber, and it leapt onto his torso. Its frothy, peg-toothed jaws snapped at Mark's exposed throat, and he struggled to hold the freak back with his shotgun, both arms trembling with exhaustion. "Ready?" he yelled, the storm doing its best to carry Mark's voice away. "Get out of here." I could run, and he wouldn't even curse my name. He's not selfish. Not like me. Anger flared deep inside me, a deep, seething rage that burned in my veins. I brought up my pistol, both arms shaking with the cold rain, and staggered back his way. Bang! The pistol danced in my hands, spitting shiny brass casings into the gloom of night. Another puppet tumbled to the ground, and it gave me enough room to reach the one astride Mark's chest. "Get off!" I drew the knife from my belt and brought it down as hard as I could into the back of the puppet's head. It reared back, but I had a hold of the creature's collar and ripped the knife free to drive it in again and again into the wooden head, my fingers stinging with the exertion. Splinters and pitch-black goo coated my face, but I couldn't stop. Something inside of me snapped, and all the anxious tension from months of guilt and shame boiled over into an uncontrollable hate. It couldn't end this way. Not for Mark. Not for me. I wasn't going to hurt him. Not again. And I wouldn't let anything else do it either. A barefooted puppet wrapped her arms around my waist in a flying tackle. The gun flew from my right hand, the knife from my left, and we both went down into a heap, the muck splattering our limbs. Yet this time, I didn't feel the crippling fear. I rolled with the puppet in the grass and mud like a wild animal, biting, clawing, and screaming with visceral hostility. She tried to gnaw at my face, but I drove my thumb up to the knuckle in her squishy dead eyeball and pushed the girl on the ground. Mark's shotgun roared back to life, and when the gun ran dry, he swung it like a baton, shoving the buttstock into the oncoming noses of our white-eyed pursuers with rapid succession. My hand found a rock, and I hefted it high, swinging it with all my might like I was back in junior high softball at the pitcher's mound. Crack! Again, I brought it down, burying the chunk of limestone into the limp puppet's head, screaming with every blow. My voice cracked, my lungs raw from the damp air, and my pulse roared in my ears to reach a bloodthirsty crescendo. An arm wound around me from behind, and I tore at the thick coat sleeve with my chipped fingernails, head awash with adrenaline. "Let go, you scummy—" "Easy, easy, it's me." Mark Shuffle ran backwards with me in tow, his shotgun in the other hand, as a crowd of puppets heaved through the flattened grass. "Get up, they're coming." My knees were shakier than I remembered them being, but I pulled both feet back under me, and together we sprinted through the gap in the fence toward the main building of the coal yard. I threw open a rusty metal door at the base of the concrete tower, and as soon as we went through, we both shoved it closed. Snatching a piece of rusted, angled iron from a cobweb-filled corner, Mark jammed it through the narrow door handles. He stepped back, just as a chorus of bangs erupted on the other side. Fists, arms, feet, and heads ramming the sheet steel in a cacophony of sound. "It's not gonna hold." I paced in a frantic search of the dimly lit interior for something else to use as a barricade. "Mark, where are we going?" "There." He headed for a concrete alcove in the wall, where a set of recessed, dusty steps wound upward. "Head to the top. We're almost through." With our feet pounding on the cement, Mark and I raced ever higher into the abandoned stairwell, as small, broken windows gushed wind and rain at us in regular intervals. The corroded doors buckled. Dozens of puppets swarmed into the tower, some on all fours with glowing eyes and hellish croaks. Everything flashed by in the frame of my dim red headlamp, like a nightmare of blood red and dirt black all rolled together. My calves throbbed, and the bag on my back weighed a pound more with each step. Lighting up the world outside, my eyes caught a large, slender figure in the glow of the storm. "Look out!" The words barely left my mouth, and the floor beneath my shoes shook like an earthquake had struck. Caught by surprise, Mark tripped, and the massive gray hand plunged through the wall from outside to slam down where he had been a second ago. The creature roared, its eerie, whale-like call piercing my eardrums to rip through my skull. Like a child groping for a toy in the dark, the big one prodded the stairwell with clumsy fingers. Each shove of the gigantic hand only widened the hole in the wall and knocked more concrete loose from the dilapidated structure. Large cracks ran over the walls, across the ceiling, and down the floor. The building shifted on its foundation with a sickening crunch. It's gonna knock the whole thing on top of us. Unarmed and panicking, I dove into the shadows, bits of concrete raining down around me. Hey, this is Jay Taylor with Dante's Disciples, and that was Stay Away from Tauerpine Road Part 2, written by Random Appalachian 468. You can find him on Reddit, Nosleep. Really exciting, very happy to read this story. I think it's pacing very well. Mark is a pretty solid hero. I'm glad that he keeps his head level. I wish our main character, Maddie, again, would stop tripping so hard about people being in love with her. I think she needs to focus on survival, but she is doing a good job. When she tucked her fear away and went all feral, I was very excited. It was hard to read the story and not kind of get too pumped up and try to stay in character. Anyway, I'm going to keep narrating this in other series. And again, I apologize for disappearing. I am designing a video game right now, as well as working on a short film. And I want to keep this going, so please, like button, share, subscribe. Again, human narrators are competing with AI channels that can put out 5 or 6 stories a day, and a lot of people don't seem to notice or mind the difference. But if you do like human narration written by human people and you want to keep that going, you can help me out by doing your part, and I'll do my part and keep reading.